My wife cheated on me with my own brother. I raised a son for 5 years without knowing, but then... So, this is something I never imagined writing. But I guess that's the thing about betrayal. You never see it coming until it's too late. My name's Mike, and I've been married to Karen for 8 years. We live in a quiet suburb. The kind where everyone waves at you as you walk your dog, and the biggest drama is who didn't bring in their trash cans. We've got a 5-year-old son, Ryan, who's the absolute light of my life. Karen and I met through a mutual friend and hit it off immediately. She's beautiful, sharp, and she has this way of commanding a room without even trying. For years, I thought I had the perfect life. Karen had always been flirty, but I chalked it up to her personality. I was confident, maybe a little too confident, that our marriage was rock solid. But a few months ago, things started to change, and not in the usual, oh, maybe we're just growing apart way that happens to some couples. It was like overnight, she became a completely different person. She'd start picking fights over the smallest things. She'd get annoyed at how I folded the laundry or how I wasn't ambitious enough for someone with a good job. The thing is, I own my own small business, and while we weren't raking in millions, we were comfortable. But it was never enough for her anymore. She was spending more nights working late at her office job, and when I'd ask about it, she'd just brush me off with a quick excuse or a sarcastic, "What? Do you think I'm cheating on you?" I guess I laughed it off. I had no reason to believe she'd ever do something like that. That was until a package arrived in the mail that set off the whole roller coaster of insanity. It was one of those DNA test kits. You know, the ones that tell you your ancestry. Karen ordered it for fun, saying she wanted to see where Ryan got his red hair from because no one in our family had it. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. About a week after Karen ordered that DNA test, it arrived. She was all excited about it, like it was some fun family game. I remember her handing me the little swab kit, telling me to help Ryan with his. I went along with it, thinking it'd be fun to see what mix of ancestry would show up. We both did the test too, just for comparison, you know. Fast forward a few weeks, and the results came in. Karen called me over to the computer, practically bouncing in her chair. "Let's see what little mystery man we've got here," she said, referring to Ryan's red hair. I stood behind her as she clicked through the results. At first, everything seemed pretty standard, a mix of European ancestry, as expected. But then Karen went quiet, real quiet. She clicked a few more times, looking closer at the results. I didn't understand what was going on, but I could feel a tension growing in the room. Something wasn't right. "What is it?" I asked, leaning over her shoulder. She didn't respond at first, just kept clicking through the data. Finally, she turned to me, her face pale, her mouth slightly open like she was about to say something but couldn't find the words. "I think there's a mistake," she muttered, her voice shaky. "The test, it says you're not Ryan's biological father." My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. All the little percentages and genetic matches. It didn't make sense. Ryan was my son. I knew it. We'd been together since he was born. I'd held him in my arms at the hospital, watched him grow up, tucked him into bed every night. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's not possible. There has to be some kind of mix-up." Karen quickly agreed. Too quickly. Yeah, it has to be a mistake," she said, her eyes darting nervously. "These things aren't always accurate. It's probably just a glitch." But deep down, something in me knew this wasn't a mistake. The way she was acting, the look on her face, it all screamed guilt. I looked back at the screen, then back at Karen, and in that moment, the world I thought I knew started to crack apart. I couldn't let it go. As much as I wanted to believe it was just a glitch, something about the way Karen was acting didn't sit right with me. She was too eager to brush it off, too quick to shift the conversation. But this wasn't something I could ignore. Later that night, when Ryan was asleep, I brought it up again. "Karen," I said, my voice more steady now, "we need to talk about this. The test. There's no way it's just a mistake. These things are accurate. You know that." She looked up from her phone, her face a little too calm, like she had been rehearsing her response. "Mike, come on. You're overthinking it. These tests aren't 100%. We've got nothing to worry about." But I wasn't convinced. "I think we should retest," I suggested, trying to keep my tone even, just to be sure. That's when her whole demeanor changed. She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. "What's the point? I mean, it's a waste of money. Ryan's our son. End of story." Her defensiveness hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't looking for an argument, but something in me knew I had to push. "Why are you so against it? Why not just do it and clear it up?" Her voice rose, her frustration bubbling over. "Because it doesn't matter, Mike. Ryan is ours. No stupid test is going to change that." She stood up abruptly, storming out of the room, leaving me there in silence. And as much as I wanted to believe her, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something big. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the conversation, trying to make sense of the pieces that didn't fit. I thought about all the times Karen had been distant lately, all the late nights at work and the unexplained outings. My gut twisted with a realization I didn't want to face. The next morning, I made the decision. I'd go behind her back and take another DNA test, but this time, I wouldn't tell her. If she was hiding something, I needed to know. I owed it to myself and to Ryan. It was a move I'd never thought I'd make in a million years, but the doubt was eating me alive. Something wasn't right, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. I didn't waste any time. The very next day, I ordered a new DNA test, making sure Karen wouldn't see the receipt or the package when it came. I felt guilty, like I was betraying her by doing this behind her back, but at the same time, it felt like I had no other choice. I needed answers, and I couldn't trust what she was telling me anymore. The waiting was the worst part. Every day, I'd come home from work, go through the motions with Ryan, playing with him, helping him with his little projects, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about what I'd do if the test came back and confirmed my worst fears. How could I even begin to process something like that? Karen, meanwhile, seemed to act like everything was fine. She didn't bring up the test again, didn't mention the argument we'd had. She was back to her usual self, almost too much. She was overly sweet, overly attentive. It was like she was trying to distract me or convince me that nothing was wrong. But now I knew better than to just brush off my gut feeling. A couple of weeks later, the results came in. I opened the email while I was at work, my hands shaking as I clicked through the tabs. There it was, plain as day, written out in cold, clinical language. I was not Ryan's father. I just sat there for what felt like forever, staring at the screen, my heart racing and my stomach turning. My world fell apart in that moment. This wasn't some glitch, some mistake. It was real. I wasn't Ryan's dad. I'd spent the past 5 years of my life loving this kid, raising him, and believing he was mine. And now, in the blink of an eye, all of that was ripped away. Worse yet, Karen had known. She had to have known. There was no way she could hide something like this from me for so long without being aware of what had happened. That night, when I got home, I could barely look at her. I sat through dinner with Ryan, barely speaking, while Karen chattered away like nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and I wasn't sure how I was going to confront her about it. I wasn't just angry. I was devastated. I felt like the person I'd built my entire life with had stabbed me in the back in the cruelest way possible. And I couldn't shake the question that was now gnawing at me. If I wasn't Ryan's father, then who was? The answer, I feared, was going to make this nightmare even worse. The DNA results haunted me. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, but before confronting Karen, I needed to know the full truth. I had to understand who Ryan's real father was. The tension in our house was suffocating, and every time I looked at her, the weight of betrayal pressed harder. One night, after Ryan was asleep, I finally gathered the courage. I sat across from Karen, my heart pounding, and asked, "Who's Ryan's father?" She froze, her expression shifting from shock to panic. She tried to deny it at first, but her voice trembled. "Mike, what are you talking about?" "I know," I said firmly. "The DNA test came back. I'm not his father. So who is?" Her face crumbled and tears welled up in her eyes. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. It's your brother, James." Time stopped. My own brother. My blood. I felt the world collapse around me. "James? My brother?" I barely managed to get the words out. The air knocked from my chest. Karen sobbed harder. "I'm so sorry, Mike. It was one mistake. Years ago. I didn't want it to be like this." The weight of her confession crushed me. My brother had betrayed me. My wife had betrayed me. And the child I had raised and loved, he wasn't even mine. In that moment, I didn't know if I could ever forgive either of them. After Karen's confession, I couldn't stay in the house. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. Every photo of Ryan a painful reminder of the lie I had been living. I grabbed my keys and left without saying a word. My mind raced as I drove aimlessly, trying to make sense of it all. James, my own brother, we'd always been close. He was a fun uncle, always around for family events, always doting on Ryan. I never once questioned it. Now I wondered if every smile, every hug, was hiding this terrible secret. I pulled over to the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I couldn't let this go without confronting him. I dialed his number, my hands shaking. After a few rings, James picked up, sounding casual, like everything was normal. "Hey, Mike, what's up?" I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. "We need to talk. Now." There was a pause on the other end. Okay? Is everything all right?" "No, it's not. Meet me at the park near Mom's place. In 30 minutes. I hung up before he could say anything else. My heart pounded as I sat there, waiting. When James pulled up, he gave me that same easy smile he always did. It made my blood boil. "What's going on, man?" he asked, walking over. "You look like you're about to explode." I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I know, James. I know you're Ryan's father." His face went pale. The color drained from him as if he'd been hit by a truck. "Mike, You slept with my wife." I shouted, my fist clenched. "You betrayed me. Your own brother." James stammered, trying to find the words, but nothing he could say would fix this. "It was a mistake, Mike. I swear, it only happened once. I didn't know she got pregnant. I didn't." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Once. You think that makes it better? You think it makes it okay?" He took a step toward me, his hands raised like he was trying to calm me down. "I am sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I would never intentionally hurt you. Don't act like you didn't know what you were doing." I spat. "You destroyed everything." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, his apologies hanging in the air. I had heard enough. My brother had shattered the one thing that could never be repaired, our trust. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't, after confronting James. I drove around for hours, trying to calm the storm inside me, but it was impossible. The betrayal from my own brother, Karen's lies. It all felt too much to handle. I ended up crashing at a motel, staring at the ceiling for most of the night, wondering how my life had turned into this nightmare. By morning, I knew I couldn't avoid the next step. Facing Karen again, I headed home, not sure what I'd say or even how I felt. When I walked in, the house was quiet. Karen was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying. She looked up when she saw me, her face full of regret. "Mike," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry." I couldn't even look at her. I felt like I didn't know this woman anymore. "How long were you going to keep this from me?" I asked, my voice cold. Karen wiped her tears, her hands trembling. I thought if I never told you, we could just move on. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want Ryan to lose you. I finally met her eyes, and all I saw was someone I no longer recognized. But you were okay with lying to me for 5 years, letting me raise a child that isn't mine without telling me the truth. I never meant for this to happen, she cried, standing up, her voice cracking. It was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake, and I've regretted it every single day. But I didn't know how to tell you without ruining everything. I shook my head, feeling my anger rising again. You already ruined everything, Karen. You and James both. She took a step toward me, desperation in her eyes. But Ryan is still your son, Mike. You've raised him, loved him. He's yours in every way that matters. Please don't punish him for my mistake. That hit me hard. Ryan, I couldn't even think about him without my heart breaking. He was my son in all the ways that counted, but now, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to be around him without feeling this crushing weight of betrayal. I need time, I muttered, stepping back from her. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all of this right now. Karen's face crumpled as she realized she couldn't fix this, at least not now. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, needing space, needing to breathe. The truth had shattered my family, and I had no idea how or if I could ever put the pieces back together. The next few days were a blur. I spent most of my time in that same motel, trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't face Karen, and more than that, I couldn't face Ryan. Every time I thought about him, I felt this deep, crushing guilt. He was just an innocent kid, and none of this was his fault. But now, whenever I looked at him, all I could think about was the lie I'd been living. I knew I had to go back eventually. Ryan didn't deserve to be abandoned because of something he had no control over. No matter what the DNA said, I had been his father for 5 years. I had changed his diapers, taught him to ride a bike, stayed up with him when he was sick. That wasn't something I could just walk away from. But being around Karen was unbearable. The sight of her only reminded me of the betrayal, of how she had stolen the truth from me. And every time I thought about James, I felt my blood boil. My brother, the one person I should have been able to trust, had done the unforgivable. After a few sleepless nights, I decided to go home. I didn't know what my future with Karen would look like, but I had to see Ryan. He didn't deserve to lose both his parents because of this mess. When I walked into the house, Ryan was sitting on the living room floor, playing with his action figures. He looked up, and his face lit up in a way that made my heart ache. "Dad!" he shouted, running toward me with that innocent, carefree energy only a child can have. I knelt down and hugged him, and for a moment, everything else faded away. In that second, it didn't matter who his biological father was. Ryan was my son, and I loved him more than anything in this world. But even in that embrace, a part of me felt broken, like I was living a lie every time I held him. Karen appeared in the doorway, watching us quietly, her face filled with a mix of hope and regret. I stood up, still holding Ryan's hand, and avoided her gaze. "I'm here for Ryan," I said flatly, not wanting to talk about anything else yet. "He deserves his dad." Karen nodded, her eyes filling with tears again, but she didn't say anything. She knew there was no quick fix to this, no easy path forward. I could see she wanted to talk, to explain, but I wasn't ready to hear it yet. For now, I just focused on Ryan, trying to hold on to what little bit of normalcy I had left. But deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid the truth forever. The storm between Karen, James, and me was far from over, and sooner or later, I'd have to face it head on. Coming home to Ryan helped me focus on what mattered most to him. For the next few days, I tried to return to some kind of routine. I played with him, helped him with his homework, and tucked him into bed every night. But in the back of my mind, the weight of everything I had learned still pressed down on me. Karen kept her distance. She knew I wasn't ready to talk about the future, and for that, I was grateful. But every time I caught her looking at me, I could see the guilt and sadness in her eyes. She was waiting for me to make the next move, but I wasn't sure what that would be. One evening, after Ryan had gone to bed, Karen sat down across from me in the kitchen. For the first time since everything came out, she spoke up. Mike, we need to talk about what's next. For all of us, she said, her voice calm but filled with worry. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to ignore her and avoid the conversation, but I knew she was right. We couldn't keep living in limbo forever. I had to figure out what I was going to do about her, about James, and about our future. I don't even know where to start, I finally said, staring down at the table. I can't look at you without seeing the betrayal. And James, I can't even think about him without wanting to punch something. I know, she whispered, tears filling her eyes again. But Mike, please, I don't want to lose you. I made a terrible mistake, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But Ryan, he still needs both of us. I'm begging you to give us a chance to fix this. I looked at her, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. But that image was clouded by everything that had happened. Trust had been shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. I don't know if I can, Karen, I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. You lied to me for 5 years. You let me believe Ryan was mine, and all the while, you knew the truth. How am I supposed to just get past that? Her tears flowed freely now, but she didn't look away. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Mike, but I'm asking for it anyway. I love you, and I don't want to lose our family. I'll do whatever it takes. I sat there in silence, torn between the life I had built and the betrayal that had destroyed it. I knew I couldn't make any decisions right then, but one thing was clear. I needed to talk to James. I needed to face him one last time and get the closure I desperately craved. I need to see James, I said quietly, standing up from the table. Karen's face tensed, but she didn't argue. She knew this conversation was inevitable. As I walked toward the door, Karen called after me. Mike, please, no matter what happens, just remember that Ryan still needs you. You're his father, no matter what the DNA says. I didn't respond, but her words stayed with me as I headed out into the night. It was time to confront my brother and deal with the fallout head-on. Driving to see James, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I wasn't sure how this conversation would go, but I knew it was long overdue. I had to face him, not just for myself, but for Ryan. The anger I felt was still raw, but beneath it was something else. Hurt. My own brother had been part of the deepest betrayal of my life. When I arrived at James's place, I sat in the car for a minute, trying to gather myself. My mind replayed everything. The moments I had trusted him, the way he had always been there for Ryan, and the night Karen's confession shattered everything. Taking a deep breath, I knocked on his door. James opened it, and the guilt on his face was instant. He didn't need me to say anything. He knew why I was there. Mike, he said softly, stepping aside to let me in. I've been waiting for this. I walked past him, standing in his living room, feeling like a stranger in my own brother's home. How could you do this to me? I asked, my voice barely under control. How could you betray me like that? I trusted you. You were my brother. James looked down at the floor, the weight of his actions clearly pressing on him. I wish I had an excuse, Mike, but I don't. I screwed up. It was a moment of weakness, a mistake that's haunted me every day since. I didn't know Karen was pregnant. If I had known, maybe I would have said something sooner. I shook my head, anger flaring up. You didn't just betray me once, James. You kept it a secret for years. You watched me raise Ryan, knowing he wasn't mine, and you never said a word. He finally met my eyes, his own filled with regret. I know. I am sorry. I was a coward. I thought keeping quiet would protect everyone, but I see now it only made things worse. Worse. I snapped. You think this could get worse? You ruined everything. You and Karen destroyed my life, and now I have no idea what to do about Ryan. James took a deep breath. Mike, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But Ryan, He's still your son in every way that matters. I never tried to take that from you. I felt a lump rise in my throat. As much as I hated James in that moment, I couldn't ignore the truth. Ryan was the one innocent person in all of this, and he still needed me. But how was I supposed to navigate this mess? I don't know what's going to happen between me and Karen, I admitted, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. But Ryan, I can't just walk away from him. He's my son, no matter what the DNA says. James nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. I know, and I'm sorry, Mike, for everything. I stood there, the anger slowly giving way to exhaustion. I wasn't ready to forgive him, but I also wasn't ready to completely cut him out of my life. Not yet. There were too many things left unresolved, too many emotions still tangled up inside me. Without saying another word, I turned and left. As I got back into the car, I realized that the road ahead was going to be long and painful, but I had to figure out a way forward. For Ryan, for myself, and maybe one day, for the family I thought I had. After confronting James, I returned home drained. Karen was waiting, her eyes full of worry. "Did you talk to him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, sitting down heavily. "Yeah, I talked to him, but it doesn't change anything." She wiped her tears, trembling. "Can we fix this, Mike? Can we try?" I shook my head, my heart heavy. "I don't know, Karen. I don't know if I can forgive you, or James. I don't even know if our marriage can survive. But I'm not walking away from Ryan. He needs me." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right if I have to." Despite her words, the trust between us felt broken beyond repair. I moved into the guest room, and we barely spoke. The days passed in tense silence, with both of us focusing on keeping things as normal as possible for Ryan. One night, as I sat with him, Ryan climbed into my lap, his little face full of concern. "Dad, are you mad at Mommy? You've been sad a lot." His question hit me hard. I forced a smile, stroking his hair. "I'm not mad at you, buddy. Mommy and I are just figuring things out. But no matter what happens, I'm always here for you." He nodded and hugged me tightly. In that moment, I realized Ryan was my only constant. Whatever happened with Karen, my bond with him couldn't be undone. But the future with her, that was something I wasn't sure I could ever rebuild. In the weeks that followed, Karen and I lived in a fragile truce. I stayed in the guest room, avoiding any deep conversations. Every day felt like walking on eggshells, with both of us trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for Ryan. But the cracks were there, impossible to ignore. Karen kept her distance, doing her best to respect the space I needed. She was constantly apologetic, offering to talk whenever I was ready, but I wasn't. I couldn't get past the betrayal, not yet. Ryan, though, was the glue holding it all together. He was too young to fully understand what was going on, but he sensed the tension. One evening, after dinner, he asked if we could go to the park, just the two of us. I agreed, needing the break from the heavy atmosphere at home. At the park, Ryan ran around, laughing and carefree, and for a little while, I managed to push everything aside. Watching him, I was reminded that no matter what had happened, he was still my son in every way that mattered. He needed me to be strong, even when I felt like I was falling apart inside. On the drive home, he asked, "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" I swallowed hard, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, buddy," I said, even though I wasn't entirely sure. "We'll be okay." But as the days stretched on, I realized something had to change. The limbo we were living in wasn't sustainable. Karen and I couldn't keep pretending that things were fine when the air between us was thick with everything left unsaid. Ryan deserved more than parents who barely spoke, trapped in the wreckage of a broken marriage. I knew I couldn't avoid the hard conversations forever. So that night, after putting Ryan to bed, I sat down with Karen. "We need to talk," I said quietly, my heart pounding. She looked at me, eyes wide, as if bracing herself for the worst. I don't know what the future holds for us, I began, choosing my words carefully. But we can't keep going on like this. We need to figure out what's next, whether that means trying to rebuild or moving on. For Ryan's sake, we need some kind of resolution. Karen nodded slowly, her voice trembling. I want to make this work, Mike. I want our family to stay together. But if you can't forgive me, I'll understand. I just don't want to lose you. I looked at her, torn between the love I once had and the hurt that still consumed me. I didn't have an answer for her, not yet. But the one thing I knew for sure was that this limbo couldn't last. We had to decide, one way or another, how to move forward. After days of avoiding each other, Karen finally broke the silence one evening. She sat down across from me, her face pale and tired. "Mike, if you want me to leave, I'll go," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't want to make this harder on you." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me did want her to leave, to have space to figure things out. But another part of me wasn't ready to make that call. As angry as I was, throwing her out wasn't the solution, especially with Ryan caught in the middle. "I don't know if that's the answer," I said finally, rubbing my face in frustration. "I'm still hurt. I don't know if I can forgive you, or James. But I know one thing. Ryan needs both of us. I can't just have you disappear from his life." Karen nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'll stay, or I'll go. Whatever you need, I'll do it. I just want to do what's right for Ryan." That was the crux of it. Ryan. He was the innocent one in all of this. I couldn't let my anger and hurt rip apart his life. "I need time," I said, my voice softened now. "I don't know if we can fix this, but I owe it to Ryan to try. For him, we need to at least try." Karen's relief was obvious, though we both knew this wasn't a quick fix. The trust between us had been shattered, and rebuilding it would take more than just words. We needed real work, real effort. A few days later, we started going to therapy. It was harder than I thought, sitting in a room, talking through everything I'd tried to bury. The anger, the betrayal, the fear of being hurt again. Karen laid it all out too, her guilt, her regret, her deep desire to make things right. The sessions were uncomfortable, often leaving us raw and exhausted. But they were necessary. Without them, there was no chance of moving forward. Slowly, we began to have honest conversations again, the kind we hadn't had in a long time. It didn't mean I forgave her, but it was a step in the right direction. It was clear that our marriage, as it was, couldn't just be repaired. We had to build something new, something based on more than the broken trust of the past. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this. If not for us, then for Ryan. Therapy became a regular part of our lives, but it wasn't easy. Every session felt like reopening a wound that was still fresh. I'd talk about the betrayal, my anger, and my fear that I'd never be able to trust Karen again. She would sit there, her face tight with regret, admitting her guilt, but also her love for me and her hope that we could rebuild. One night, after a particularly emotional session, we sat together in silence on the couch. The tension that had been ever present for weeks wasn't as sharp, but it lingered heavy between us. "I know it'll never be the same," Karen said softly, breaking the quiet. "I know I can't erase what I did, but I still love you, Mike. I'll keep fighting for us, for our family, even if it takes forever." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the desperation in it. I turned to her, wanting to say something comforting, something that would give her hope. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could give her that. "I'm trying, Karen," I replied, my voice low. "But it's hard. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, and I don't know what that means for us." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears, but she didn't push me for more. We sat there for a while, side by side but feeling worlds apart. Still, for the first time, the silence didn't feel like a wall between us. It felt like the beginning of something, maybe healing, maybe not, but something was shifting. It wasn't about getting back to the way things were. I knew that was impossible. It was about figuring out if we could build something new, something real, despite everything that had been broken, whether that was together or apart. I wasn't sure yet, but at least we were trying. As weeks passed, the tension in the house began to ease, little by little. Therapy helped us start to communicate again, but there was no rushing the process. Karen and I were both cautious, careful not to say too much or too little. But something had shifted. We were no longer pretending everything was fine. We were facing the reality of what had happened, even if it hurt. One evening, after we'd put Ryan to bed, Karen sat down next to me on the couch. It was one of the first times we'd been this close without the weight of unspoken tension hanging between us. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Maybe we don't need to decide everything right now. Maybe we just take it one day at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just see where we end up." I looked at her, surprised. She wasn't asking for promises or quick forgiveness anymore. She was asking for patience, for a chance to rebuild, step by step. "One day at a time," I repeated, nodding slowly. It sounded reasonable, maybe even possible. After everything, I didn't know if we could ever fully repair what we'd lost, but I was willing to try, at least for Ryan. We sat in silence after that, but this time it felt different. It wasn't awkward or filled with tension. It was peaceful, like maybe we'd found a way to breathe again. Maybe, just maybe. There was a future for us, even if it looked nothing like the past. The road ahead was long, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time, I felt like we had a chance. We weren't the same people we were before the betrayal, but maybe we could be something new, something better. And for now, that was enough.